You're listening to Cambodia Business Week with Anthony Galliano and his business friends on Radio 1FM 103.7. Welcome to Cambodia Business Week with your host Anthony Galliano here on Radio 1FM 103.7.
Good morning, Cambodia. It's 4 minutes after the hour, and you're welcome back to Cambodia Business Week after a little Christmas holiday. We are back, and we have today two guests in our first segment to talk about some significant and major changes in tax, which were just announced on Christmas Day of all days. Tax and Christmas Day, it just doesn't really feel good, does it? We have tax expert and teacher guru Clint O'Connell is rejoining us. He was a previous guest. If anybody to talk about tax, it's got to be Clint. And our second person on the panel is Babulal Parihar from V Chartered Accountants. So we're going to also talk a little bit about the importance of keeping proper accounting records in a small business given these significant changes. So good morning, panel. Good morning, tax panel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. Let's begin talking about some of the top stories of the week. We are a business show, and from going forward, we're going to mention some of the top stories that occurred during the week. I guess one of them that was really important was the MBC issued their report, and they expect modest growth of about 6.9% this year and going to about 7% next year. So not as robust as we've been in the past, and there is, I guess, a little concern about some of the industries. Perhaps agriculture. There was a little bit of a drought this year, and also there was unrest in the garment industry. So is the Cambodian economy still on track and still growing at the same sort of expectations we've had over the last 10 years, Clint?
Yeah, well, good morning. Yeah, I would think that the NBC had taken a very sort of conservative outlook for next year. I think in the article they mentioned some issues like Myanmar coming online, as well as growth in Vietnam potentially impacting the Cambodian market. But I still, from my own personal perspective, still see Cambodia's economy as fairly vibrant, and I still would expect significant growth coming into this year, 2016.
Okay, and what is your view?
Yes, for me, yes, we have all seen that Cambodia has had a very nice economy in the last 10 years, especially before 2009. We have seen double-figure growth, and after that also, this economy has maintained its growth on an average 7%. And so, yeah, still we have seen this Asian integrations, and so there are few of the challenges for the economy. But in coming time, yes, I think that the Cambodia will still retain its growth, yeah, and there will be no issue about the growth.
I think there's also a little bit of concern that with the Fed raising interest rates, we're seeing a potentially stronger real, which would possibly play into some positives and negatives. So we have some challenges. We have ASEAN integration, which we believe will be short-term at least positive. We have a stronger real, which is effectively a stronger dollar, which is going to hurt us a little bit in terms of our cost base. Certainly in the garment industry, becomes less competitive with a stronger dollar. So yeah, I guess at 7%, that's not bad, but it's still sort of not at the same pace we've been looking at over the last 3, 4, 5 years. So we'll see. The other quick story is Starbucks enters the crowded coffee market in the kingdom. Is there going to be a coffee shop on every block in BKK1 and
Yes.
How much of an effect do you think this is going to have? I guess it really just sort of comes down. It's good to have them here. It's because if you travel around the world, Starbucks obviously is one of the favorite coffee chains there is. Is it really going to get way too crowded, and how is this going to impact the coffee market?
Yeah, I guess from a Western perspective, you might see a Starbucks opening in Cambodia as a badge of honor or a sign that you've finally made it as a country. I don't think, I think there's still, enough room in the market for Starbucks to obviously survive. Obviously, their first store is at the airport, so I'm sure they'll get plenty of business through that. But yeah, I think it's just obviously a sign of Cambodia's growing economy, and I'm sure they'll do well in the future.
Yeah, I also believe that the Starbucks, that's a very big player in the market of coffee, and we can see that in Phnom Penh especially, we can see a lot of coffee shops. It's almost every corner of the street, and we still found that this market is growing. Yes, we never found that these coffee shops are without pupils. Sometimes we found that we go there and we still could not find a place. So yeah, coffee, I think that Cambodian, Phnom Penh youngsters and business people, they love coffee, and coffee is just not to drink the coffee, but it's a lot can happen over a coffee.
Okay, and finally, just there's a lot of entrance into this money transfer business, which is the telecoms are actually doing, as well as Wing. Wing had a sort of very monopolistic position when it first started out. That's changing. I guess one of the issues is the banks are really losing a lot of revenue. Never mind that Wing is being challenged. Why are telecoms and why is money transfer heating up so much and having new players come in? True Money being the latest.
Well, I think Cambodia is a little bit unique when opposed to other jurisdictions, more developed jurisdictions, insofar as the infrastructure for a developed banking system is probably not there yet, but every man and his dog has a cell phone. So it's a natural fit to combine the mobile services with the transfer of money. Typical scenario being a worker in Phnom Penh transferring money back to the province. It's a natural fit to use the mobile banking services to do that. Obviously, it's been a successful business for Wing to date. Other businesses have looked at it and seen it as a viable model and looked to copy it and get some of the share.
Yeah, it's really interesting how telecom companies are becoming insurance brokers. They're becoming money transfer agents, and as well as telecom companies. Do you see this model anywhere in the world besides here? It's
For me, no. I mean, they normally are quite independent, and each industry protects their own patch quite
and regulated probably a lot more. I mean, money transfer is a financial business, and now telecom companies are essentially the biggest in it. So it's a little strange. All right, thanks for your opinion on that. Let's get into the topic of tax, which is we have a tax panel today, and there is some significant announcements that were made on Christmas Day. So, Clint, can you roughly tell us what those announcements were and how they affect the taxpayers in the market, especially the small businesses?
Okay, well, just I guess a little background. The main piece of legislation that was passed in December, it was on the 17th of December, was the 2016 law on financial management. And effectively what the financial management law did was to eliminate the estimated tax regime in Cambodia, which a large number of businesses previously or currently pay their taxes via the estimated tax regime.
And just explain a little bit more. So most of the market is estimated. I mean, most of the gold shops, the noodle shops, the retail shops. If you go into these small, well, some of them aren't small. Let's be honest; they're quite significant. Even hotels, guest houses, restaurants. Most of them are really estimated regime. There's only a really small percentage of the market that's real regime. Correct?
Correct. Well, the irony is, and there's basically two main types of tax regimes now in Cambodia. The so-called real regime, which is where you have to file your monthly and annual tax returns, subject to tax audits, charge 10% VAT, and the estimated regime, which you quite rightly pointed out, is where most businesses currently pay their taxes.
But we assume like 99% of the businesses are estimated?
That's right. Even though there are registration requirements that were currently in place, no one really followed them, so only a very small number of businesses were paying their tax via the real regime.
Right, and estimated really is a tax officer going around collecting little bits of money from each of these shops.
Yeah, at its simplest form, estimated basically means you pre-negotiate your annual taxes in advance. You don't have to worry about ongoing tax compliance, tax audits. You don't have to charge 10% VAT. It's a very basic type of method of paying tax.
Right. The reason why you don't have to worry about tax audits is because as a real regime taxpayer, that small 1%, it's self-assessment. You're assessing your taxes yourself.
That's
Where
exactly
supposedly on the estimated regime, the tax officer is doing that. And typically they'd go into a restaurant, count the number of chairs and tables, and say your revenue must be around that. But the reality, if you talk to an estimated taxpayer, they pay very, very, very little.
That's very true. I think the common sort of thread is that you would pay much less tax in the estimated regime than if you were in the real regime.
I think much less is being generous. I mean, barely anything, effectively, right?
Correct.
Right. So the 99% of that market that's barely paying taxes is got this huge challenge coming up. Correct?
Yes. Well, the tax department informally recognised when they passed this financial law and management that only a very small percentage of the total tax revenue collected actually came from the estimated tax regime, whereas, as you pointed out, the people in that regime make up most of the businesses in Cambodia. So economically, it's not currently a viable working solution.
So huge opportunity for the government here. Huge opportunity. The government coffers should just bloat from actually transforming and converting these estimated taxpayers.
Well, the key thing and the big question mark and the big question going forward is implementation. How is this going to be implemented in the future?
Was there any clarity in that announcement?
I'd have to say not particularly. I mean, I would imagine most businesses that would be affected would have no idea that this law has recently been enacted.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. This is a monumental announcement for the country, and we'll be talking about execution of this and the opportunities and possibly the pitfalls of doing it. We'll be right back after this short musical break.
We speak to the movers and shakers of the business world. So when it comes to business in Cambodia, look no further than the Cambodia Business Week on Radio 1FM 103.7. Welcome to Cambodia Business Week with your host Anthony Galliano here on Radio 1FM 103.7.
We're back and we're talking today about tax and accounting. There's been some very significant announcements over Christmas Day. A major transformation in the country from in terms of the tax system, from having 99% of the population estimating a small amount of tax to having to comply and deal with what real regime taxpayers have to deal with, which is quite a significant administrative burden and essentially a exponential increase in taxes being collected from small businesses today. And I guess we can't understate this announcement. I mean, this is effectively, if you look at it, most countries in the world are actually collecting taxes from their businesses in a very streamlined, similar way. However, Cambodia has had this history of separating. I guess we have to call this major tax breaks. I would assume, from what I've heard from the real regime taxpayers, who are, and the best example I have is you could have a noodle shop that's paying $2,000 or $3,000 a month, and we'll get into some of those taxes that they have to pay, and filing monthly and being subject to audits and filing annually, versus somebody who has a very similar business, same revenue base, paying $50 to $100. I mean, is that a pretty fair statement?
Yeah, that's a very fair statement. I mean, to give one example, there was a PRACA that was issued in December to do with financial leasing. Now, under the old Cambodian model, whereby there was an estimated tax regime, a finance lease company would find it very difficult to operate because when they essentially acquired the good that was to be the subject of the finance lease, they would have to charge 10% on that good back to the customer as well as their finance charge. Whereas if the customer went directly to the estimated tax regime business and brought and financed directly with that particular business, they could save a lot of money essentially. So having these two distinct tax regimes, and a lot of businesses basically illegally been in one of them being the estimated tax regime makes for a very inconsistent interpretation or application of the tax laws in Cambodia.
And that's a very good point, because these tax officers that go around collecting money, they're not really applying any effective general. The general rule, I believe, was 2% of revenue. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. But again, it's one of those things where it's a lot of anecdotal speculation as to how they come up with these figures,
and really underplaying it. And it's really a relationship issue between the taxpayer and that tax officer as to what that actual tax is going to be, rather than a true application of what your actual sales are.
Correct.
All right. So Babulal, what does this do for you and your business? Is it a massive opportunity out there now for accounting firms?
Why not, Anthony? Why not? I consider.
Is that why you came here?
No, I am.
Did you foresee this major change, and it's going to really have a big explosion of opportunity? Is that correct?
I completely agree with you, Anthony. Like as you said, that there has been a very long history about the separating of this test. I have gone through some of the articles and I found that it's a long history. Even it's a very, very long history that they are having the estimated and the real regime tax. But yes, now there is a time when the government is trying to cover up all under the real regime tax. So I'll agree with the Clint again that yes, it's a good opportunity, but at the same time it will be it's a challenge for the government to implement. So implementation will be a very big concern for the government to. And when you when you talk about to convert into estimated, which is a very big part of the the taxpayers are most of that are in estimated. So you have to educate them, you have to train them that why, how, and what are the rules and what they have to follow. And so it will be a major challenge for the government also. But over a period of time, yes, when there is a challenge, I think that's a good opportunity for the professional. So I agree with you. There is an opportunity for the professional.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit and talk about what this actually means for estimated taxpayers becoming real regime taxpayers. And that basically is, let's talk about what real regime taxpayers have to face. I mean, what the tax duty and burdens are on real regime taxpayers. So to give our audience a little idea of what that involves. So let's talk a little bit about the tax department. Can you give us a quick overview of how the tax department is structured?
Okay, so the General Department of Taxation falls under the umbrella of the Ministry of Economy and Finance in Cambodia. And the GDT is split up between various departments. We have large taxpayer department. We have the enterprise audit department, for example, another department that looks after debt arrears, litigation department. And then in Phnom Penh, we have, from memory, I think it's 7 local tax offices that are located in the various khans within Phnom Penh, which deal predominantly with the small to medium enterprises throughout Phnom Penh.
Right, and we've seen a pretty big evolution of the tax department post Khmer Rouge, because it was abolished obviously during the Khmer Rouge, and there's been a series of tax laws that have been implemented over the last 20 years. So it's been an evolution of getting the tax department up to sort of a major market level. What are the major taxes that taxpayers have to pay, and what are the administrative burdens? I shouldn't call them burdens. What are the administrative responsibilities and obligations?
Okay, so typically the main taxes for a real regime taxpayer that they would be concerned about would be the value-added tax, VAT, which is imposed at 10% of any goods and services that are provided by a real regime taxpayer. So ultimately, if you're in the real regime and you provide a good or service, you have to charge 10% VAT on that good and service to their final customer.
Which is not bad compared to the rest of the world. I think it's 20% mostly in Europe, if I remember correctly.
Correct. And again, one of the issues was before is that VAT, being a value-added tax and a consumption tax, the way it should work is there should be input-output. Insofar as the tax department should only really get the difference between the output on the sales and the input from purchases.
So just in layman's terms, it's basically through the cycle of a good and service, whether it's imported into the market, it's reworked or intermediated, and then to the final consumer, there's 10% along the way at each of those stages. So effectively, when you go into a restaurant and you eat, you're paying 10% for your on your bill as a consumer, and as a consumer, you don't have personal tax responsibilities with regards to VAT, but the company that imported the food is paying 10%. The food distributor is paying 10%, and the restaurant's paying 10%. So along the way, everybody's paying 10%, but offsetting it with VAT, they pay until it reaches the consumer where there's no offset.
Exactly. That's basically how it should work. But of course, in the past, a lot of these suppliers were not registered for VAT, so it created an imbalance in the output versus the input credit.
Right, so we have VAT. There's three other major taxes.
Of course, there's withholding tax, which causes a lot of issues for taxpayers, where essentially the real regime taxpayer has to withhold tax on behalf of a third party for particular transactions.
That's primarily rent,
services, interest, royalties. There's tax on salary, of course, if the real regime taxpayer is an employer.
Again, compared to the Western markets, pretty small. It's tiered, right? 0 to 20%.
Correct, on a monthly basis, correct.
So not bad.
We have the 1%. It's not really a tax, it's a pre-collection of tax, a 1% prepayment of tax on profit, which is collected on 1% of monthly turnover of a real regime taxpayer.
Okay, so there's four key taxes. Now what are the obligations of a taxpayer in terms of filing and reporting?
Okay, so the typical taxpayer would have to file monthly tax returns.
Now, is that normal in most markets to file monthly? That seems a little harsh.
Yeah, depends on what jurisdiction you're referring to. But yeah, it is fairly high compliance cost and obligation for Cambodia. Then, of course, there's the annual tax on profit return that needs to be declared by the taxpayer.
Which I think is a complete maze for 99% of the real regime taxpayers.
Correct. I would imagine it's going to be a very large learning curve for a lot of businesses coming up.
All right. So then I believe you also have to file your sales, all your sales, and also you have to file all your expenses monthly as well.
Correct. And then you have, of course, things like patent tax and your annual declaration of commercial enterprise as well. Okay,
we're gonna return and talk more about taxes. What a wonderful subject for Saturday morning. And we'll talk about some of the other major changes. There's other major changes as well that were announced. We'll return after this quick musical break. You're listening to Radio 1, 103.7 FM. This is Anthony. Cambodia Business Week will return shortly.
You're listening to Cambodia Business Week with Anthony Galliano and his business friends on Radio 1 FM 103.7. Radio is the only truly mobile medium. In the car, at work, and at play, radio is there. The companion and the advertising force your customers take with them wherever they go. To advertise with Radio 1, contact our sales department at 023 432418. That's 023 432418. Or email info@radio1cambodia.com. Remember, radio advertising works only on Radio 1 FM 103.7. Welcome to Cambodia Business Week with your host Anthony Galliano here on Radio 1 FM 103.7.
We are returning with our tax panel today to talk about some major new law that has been passed regarding estimated and real regime taxpayers, as well as patent tax and leases. So we'll get to all those changes. We've only covered some of them, and we'll get to all those changes a bit later on. But we were doing a quick overview of the tax system and the taxes that have to be paid. So to summarize, for real regime taxpayers, which is a really small percentage of the market today, and that's going to change dramatically over the next 2 years, there's a monthly filing obligation, which consists of VAT, withholding, tax on salary, and prepayment of profit tax, plus a sales and expense journal. So for all those estimated tax regime taxpayers listening right now, this is what you're going to be up against coming very soon. As well as an annual tax on profit. You have to pay 20% profit tax once a year, and renewal of patent tax and so forth. So there was another announcement about categorization of different levels of taxpayers and patent taxes and turnover thresholds and so forth. So, Clint, could you give us a quick overview of that?
Okay, so basically in the Law on Financial Management 2016, which was came into effect on the 17th of December, as you mentioned, abolished the estimated regime and modified the existing real regime, and this modification was clarified in a praka that was issued on Law Days, Christmas Day, 25th of last month, whereby the modified real regime now consists of three categories of taxpayer, small, medium and large. Essentially, the small taxpayer would encompass most of those taxpayers who currently would be in the estimated tax regime. So if you are a business and you have turnover of approximately more than 62,500, that's annual turnover, and you are a sole proprietor, then you would be required to fall into the small taxpayer category.
Right. So if you're under that threshold, you don't have to register as a taxpayer.
Correct.
Now, how do they pay tax if you're under the threshold? That's not clear, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess that would again, maybe it's going to be a negotiation, but that's a very good question.
Because if there's no more estimated regime, then who collects taxes from them?
Yeah, it basically works out to around $5,000 turnover a month. So you're right. If you fall underneath that category or underneath that threshold, and there's no more estimated tax regime, then there is a question mark as to how you'll be paying your taxes.
I could see a lot of people thinking right now, wow, how do I get around this? And setting up 3 or 4 small little businesses.
Well, exactly. And again, that comes down to the key question before about implementation. Discussions with the tax officer as to what category you fall under will be quite interesting, I would imagine.
Okay. So there's also a patent tax. Could you explain what a patent tax is?
Sure. Patent tax, for most foreigners, when they first come to Cambodia, it's a little bit misleading because we normally associate patent tax with intellectual property. But in Cambodia, patent tax relates to business activity, an annual fee for business activity. So for each business activity that a company or a business carries out, they have to pay an annual patent tax, which previously, I understand, the fee was $285 annually to pay that patent tax.
Now, large business taxpayers are in for a much more significant amount to pay this taxes. How much of the patent tax has gone up?
Sure. So now the patent tax is based on, again, if you are a small, medium or large taxpayer. For memory, the patent tax for small taxpayer is $100 per annum. For medium is $300 per annum. And for large, from $750 to $1,250.
All right, so the government is really upping the stakes in terms of fees and.
Correct. I think one of the rationale was the money which they will lose from no longer having an estimated tax regime, which doesn't really make sense because they should be receiving more money. They're trying to recoup with this increase in the patent tax fee.
That makes absolutely no sense.
Exactly. But it sounds good on paper.
Your business is more in the accounting and auditing, but you also do tax. Do you find your customers understand tax, Babulal?
If the customer will understand the tax, why they will come with us? So yes, they want to understand, they want to clear the things, but yes, they don't understand the things clearly. And they have many questions. Even sometimes, as you said, that if the estimated real regime will be abolished, then what will be the tax implication for those? So there are several issues which is still not clear. So yeah, there are the questions. There are several questions there from the customers, and even sometimes we are not clear. So these are the things which is happening.
I think as foreigners, we've grown up hating tax, but it's a reality to us. From the very moment when we earn our first paycheck, we see a large percentage of it being taken for salary tax and whatever else the governments in the Western world decide that we have to pay. Cambodians would becoming more adjusting to the fact that tax is essential for the economy. It's also an obligation on their part. I don't think the word obligation seems a little strange to them, but it is an obligation as a citizen or as a business owner to pay tax. If I look at when I was here, when I first arrived 8 years ago, it was this huge resistance of Cambodians to pay any kind of tax. And the reality was the enforcement of tax was very, 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 very low, I think, at that point. But now, are Cambodians adjusting their attitude towards paying taxes? Are you finding that in your business?
To be very honest, I found that yes, you are very right that Cambodians are not interested to pay tax, and there are several businesses owned by Cambodians.
It's not generalizing. It's some Cambodians.
Yes, it's not a generalized. It's not a generalized. I'm just there are several businesses, yes, in which they are. I mean to say, yes, they don't want to pay the tax. That's true. But again, thing is, it's an obligation. So it's a part. If it's a part of a responsible citizen, it's on our obligations. It's a part. Even not only for foreigners, it's a part of everyone who is there in Cambodia, and so we have to follow the Cambodian tax law. Yeah, it's our obligations.
Is there a discussion with new taxpayers coming online that how do I manage to pay as little tax as possible? Because there's one thing about the Cambodian tax code is it's not that complicated.
It's not complicated.
It's not full of a lot of loopholes.
No.
It's pretty straight. It's black and white.
Yeah, it is very much clear. It's very much clear. I mean to say it's not complicated at all. Yes. Can I got your question again?
Yeah. So is the discussions you're having with your customers, because in the Western world, in tax advisory firms make huge amounts of money with structuring and doing how to do activities where you minimize tax and take advantage of loopholes, which is unfortunate for us here as tax advisors that there isn't a lot of loopholes and there isn't a lot of structuring available. So are your clients saying, how do I minimize my tax? How do I avoid? There's nothing wrong in avoiding tax. In a sense, if it's legitimate, right? So are you having those discussions?
I will bifurcate into the three words tax evasion, tax avoidance, and tax planning. So I will go with the tax planning. In the criteria of the tax, you as a professionals, we know that how we can plan the tax very well and how we can minimize the tax for our taxpayers, our clients. So yes, I will go with the tax planning, which is nothing to wrong with, and that is with our professional skills we should do. And that's the thing. But about tax avoidance and tax evasion, I am not agree with that, because that causes a very huge penalty in the long term. So I will go with the tax planning. That will be
perhaps I use the word avoid a little bit. Clint, are we looking for a more complicated tax system coming into place as we're seeing a progression of new tax laws come into effect? Are we going to start seeing some of those interesting loopholes that we're seeing in the rest of the world, where it's not going to be just black and white anymore? For instance, there is something called a QIP, right, where effectively that gives tax breaks. So are we going to see more of those tax breaks, for instance, for small businesses now that are faced with this now a new administrative burden of filing taxes? Will we see more tax law come into effect?
Well, I mean, to answer your first question, I think there will definitely be more tax law. I think the interesting changes coming up for Cambodia will be double tax agreements and transfer pricing. Those two issues are both on the agenda and should be coming into place fairly shortly in Cambodia. Again, this comes back to the question around how is the tax department going to implement this new real regime. Of course, a lot of other jurisdictions, they do provide tax incentives to small to medium enterprises, and that would be something that we would hope that the Cambodian tax authorities might want to have a look at as well. Okay,
so what else was the consequences of the laws that were announced on Christmas? There was one certainly about the estimated real regime, patent tax increases. Was there any other?
The laws, the PRACA on the 25th was basically around the classification, as we just mentioned, the patent tax. Most of the issues with the changes we've covered already with this.
Leases as well.
Yeah, sure. Earlier in 2000, in
And something with
December.
the bank's provisioning as well, right?
Yeah, in the financial law, they mentioned that the banks will be able to, in the future, look at creating these doubtful debt provisions. But the Ministry of Economy and Finance are going to issue a new praka to provide some more detail around that, hopefully sometime soon.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to continue with our tax panel. We're going to talk about accounting, which is another foreign subject, I think, for some businesses here, and the importance of keeping proper accounting records as well as tax records, which is a huge opportunity now for accounting firms. You're listening to Radio 103.7. This is Cambodia Business Week. We'll be back shortly after this break.
We speak to the movers and shakers of the business world. So when it comes to business in Cambodia, look no further than the Cambodia Business Week on Radio 1 FM 103.7.
Radio 1 FM 103.7.
Welcome to Cambodia Business Week with your host Anthony Galliano here on Radio 1 FM 103.7.
We're back with Clint O'Connell and Babulal Parihar talking about taxes and moving on to accounting. Let's quickly talk about obligations of taxpayers beyond just filing. So Clint, just quickly, what else is a taxpayer obligated to do besides its monthly filing of tax and paying that tax?
Okay, so the key rules for a taxpayer, real regime taxpayer, is to keep their records for at least 10 years in Cambodia, 10 years being a period of time that they could potentially be subject to a tax audit. Of course, maintain sufficient supporting documentation to support the expenses and income. Of course, pay their taxes on time and file their tax returns on time. Those really are the key obligations.
Okay, you mentioned audit, which is probably a very, very scary word. How do taxpayers get audited? How does the General Department of Taxation decide, or the tax branch decide, let's go after this guy?
Well, I guess the downside, another downside, I guess, of being a real regime taxpayer is that you do file your returns based on self-assessment, which means that the tax department has the right to come in and audit your accounts, what you had declared, and reassess tax if they believe that you have underpaid. And in Cambodia, there are three main types of audit: desk audit, limited audit, and comprehensive audit. So potentially, very worst case scenario, you could be subject to three audits for the same period of time in Cambodia.
Oh, that's scary. That's scary. Okay, and what are the common mistakes of taxpayers where auditors have a field day? Let's say, wow, because I know auditors do look for particular things. So there is some. Let's be honest. There is some parts of the tax code that lack clarity. I think particularly withholding tax is one area. So what are the common mistakes taxpayers make?
You hit on withholding tax. That's a big area. A lot of taxpayers in Cambodia don't really understand, firstly, what transactions withholding tax apply to, and secondly, how to structure the transactions to minimize exposure for withholding tax as well.
Not to toot our horns about how important tax and accounting firms are, but is it getting complicated enough for these businesses to actually need to hire outside help or have their own accountants and tax people that are a high level of competency to be part of their businesses?
Well, as part of this law and financial